Hello, welcome to our video on the LCAP action tables, updated for the 22-23 school year. There are 5 action tables to be included in the 23-24 LCAP. The first 2 tables relate to actions and expenditures planned for the 23-24 school year, while the last 3 tables relate to the actions and estimated actual expenditures for the 22-23 school year. In order to complete the action tables for the 23-24 LCAP, LEAs using the Microsoft Excel spreadsheets must use 2 copies of the action table Excel spreadsheets. The first copy of the action tables will be for the 22-23 school year, and the second copy of the action tables will be for the 23-24 school year. The California Department of Education has developed instructions to aid LEAs in using the Microsoft Excel spreadsheets to complete these action tables, and they are available at the CDE LCAP website. LEAs using an electronic template system such as document tracking services to complete the action tables for the 23-24 LCAP should consult the instructions or user guide for that particular system that they are using. It's important to note that the California Department of Education made adjustments to the Excel action table templates to account for carryover calculations. Please make sure that the March 2022 version of the LCAP action tables are being used to complete these required elements. Again, the corrected action tables and instructions are available at the California Department of Education LCAP website. In addition, instructions to addressing the completed fields in the LCAP action tables have been added to the LCAP template and instructions. So let's begin with the data entry for the 22-23 school year. That's the year we're currently in. We're going to begin on the Data Entry Table tab. Begin by inputting the year, which in this case would be 22-23, the estimated actual LCFF base grant, and the estimated actual LCFF supplemental concentration grant, and that will include the 15% supplemental increase to supplemental concentration funds that the LEA expects to receive in the 22-23 school year. To get these amounts, you would use your LCFF budget calculator. Importantly for this year, you're going to include any carryover percentage from your adopted 22-23 LCAP. This percentage is copied over from your prior year 21-22 LCFF carryover table. Next, you're going to copy all actions verbatim from your adopted LCAP. You should be able to copy and paste from prior year action tables, or you may simply use last year's adopted LCAP data entry table when you completed last year's LCAP. Users of other systems, such as document tracking services or the e-template, should have all items copied over from the prior year automatically. Ensure that all budgeted amounts are copied over verbatim from your adopted 22-23 LCAP. It may be that you have added actions and services that were not included in your adopted LCAP. This is likely due to increased funding received on the final budget adoption that were not known when you adopted your LCAP. If you have additional actions, you may add them at the end of the data entry table, and make sure you identify an appropriate goal and either write NA for an action number, or you may add an appropriate action number to these new items. All added actions have a budget of $0 and a planned percentage of 0%, since these actions were not budgeted in the adopted 22-23 LCAP. So a couple of key takeaways for the data entry for 22-23. You must carry over your actions from the prior year LCAP. However, you can add additional actions implemented during the current year if you have these additional actions. Make sure any additional actions are added in with a budget percentage of 0. Next, let's move to the annual update table. The top of the annual update table will not have any data entry. These amounts are carried over from the data entry table. In addition, all of the actions and planned expenditures will flow from the data entry table. The data entry you must do on this screen is to enter in the estimated actual expenditures from all funds, regardless of funding source, that you anticipate expending during the 22-23 school year. Note also, for the annual update table, there should be no filtering applied. This table should report all actions that are in your LCAP. A quick note on all funds. It is common that LEAs might fund actions differently than how they originally budgeted. As we know, with the state budget adoption, there have been changes and new programs created, and these may not have been known when you were adopting your LCAP. And it's okay to change these funding sources, but on the annual update table, you should report the total amount from any funding source used to implement the action, even if it's different than originally budgeted. So, just a couple of notes on the annual update table. Again, make sure you're reporting all funds, regardless of funding source. Do not apply any filtering. All actions from 22-23 should be listed, and that will include any additional actions. You remember that if you do have additional actions, you do need to add these on the data entry table. You cannot add actions directly on this table. After you've completed this table, this will help inform your response to the second goal analysis prompt. And that prompt asks you to explain material differences between budgeted expenditures and estimated actual expenditures. So this table will help inform that response to help you identify where a material difference might exist. The next table in the sequence is the Contributing Actions Annual Update Table for 22-23. Now, there is one piece of data entry you need to do on this table up at the very top, and it's labeled box 6. You need to input the amount of LCFF Supplemental Concentration Grant funds the LEA estimates it will receive in the current school year. You would again get this amount from your LCFF budget calculator. The rest of the table is populated from the entries made on the data entry table, or if you're using any of the other electronic systems, they should be copied over for you. Now, similar to the last table, you are also going to enter in your estimated actuals. However, this table, you will only report your estimated actuals from LCFF funded expenditures. Do not include any other funds. Also, make sure on this worksheet it is filtered for contributing actions only. In other words, the column that says contributed to increased improved services, you're going to adjust the filter to yes. Now, if you had planned percentages of improved services, you could also input in your estimated actual percent to improve services. That only applies to actions that are contributing and that had zero funds budgeted for them. We've covered in a previous video how to determine the percent of improvement for these actions. Now, all other fields on this table will calculate based on the data entered into either the data entry table or your entries for your estimated actual expenditures. So, some key takeaways on this table. The main thing to remember is that only LCFF funded expenditures are reported on this table. If you funded any actions with any other funds, you're reporting the total funds on the previous annual update table. Make sure this table is filtered to only show contributing actions. And again, all actions have to be added in through the data entry table. Then we finally come to the last table for the 22-23 school year, and this is the LCFF carryover table. Now there's one piece of data entry you must perform on this table. You must input the estimated actual LCFF base grant funding for the current year, and you would get this amount again from your LCFF budget calculator. All other fields will calculate based on the data entered in all the previous worksheets. It's important to note, for the carryover percentage to calculate correctly, all other worksheets must be complete prior to relying on the number generated on this worksheet. Now the 22-23 carryover percentage that would be calculated in the last box on this worksheet is what will be used on the next entry table, data entry table for 23-24. So just to recap now for 22-23. Again, all actions need to be added in through the data entry table or carried over from a prior year template if you're using DTS or eTemplate. Actions should be copied verbatim, except for any actions that you've added in this school year. Now, the first two tables in the workbook, the total expenditures table and the contributing action tables, are not used for 22-23 actions. We're going to use those for the new school year. Begin by entering in the calculated carryover from your adopted 22-23 LCAP on the data entry table. So remember that this amount is added on top of your calculated increased improved services obligation that's based on your estimated actual LCFF base and supplemental concentration funding that you have received. And finally, any required carryover for the current school year 22-23 is calculated on the LCFF carryover table worksheet and will be entered into the 23-24 tables. And then this amount would be entered a year from now when you're completing the annual update for next year. All entries must be completed on the data entry table, annual update table, and contributing actions annual update table for the LCFF carryover table to calculate correctly. A note of caution. As the LCAP is refined throughout the development process, the final carryover percentage will change. You will have updated revenue projections for the current year That includes updated ADA calculations, updated unduplicated pupil percentage counts, etc. You will have updated estimated actuals for your LCFF funded actions. And often decisions are made to shift funding to other funding sources, such as one-time funds or state or federal categorical programs. It is recommended that the annual update table, contributing actions annual update table, and LCFF carryover table are reviewed and updated often, and estimates are made early in the budget development process to determine if a carryover obligation will need to be met. Remember that to satisfy a carryover obligation, contributing LCAP actions may have to be enhanced or new contributing actions developed. This will often require additional educational partner consultation that is difficult to do with impending LCAP adoption timelines. So again, the earlier that you know you might have a carryover obligation, the better. Let's move on to 23-24. So if you are using the Excel workbook, make sure you save your 22-23 version and then make a second copy of the workbook. So save as, or create a new copy in Windows for the 23-24 school year. Again, if you're using document tracking service or the e-template, you should have different versions created automatically. Once again, we will begin with the data entry tab. So you're going to input the year, now 23-24, the budgeted LCFF base grant, and the budgeted LCFF supplemental concentration grant in the appropriate boxes. You would get these amount from your LEA's adopted budget LCFF calculator. And again, here's where you're going to enter in your carryover percentage from the 22-23 carryover calculation table. If you did not have a carryover calculated, you would input 0%. Again, now you're going to copy all actions over from your proposed upcoming LCAP for 23-24 school year. If you start with making a copy from your prior 22-23 action tables, most of the work will be done for you. Just make sure you update the budget amounts to reflect your coming school year budget and add in or revise any actions as appropriate. Complete the rest of the table by identifying any student groups that you wish to identify. And if the actions identified as contributing, you must identify the scope, such as LEA-wide, school-wide, or limited, any unduplicated student groups being served, and the location of that service. You're going to identify the amounts for personnel, for LCFF funds, other state funds, local funds, federal funds, and a couple of the columns will auto-calculate based on your data entry. And then finally, if you have any planned percentages for $0 actions, you may enter it in here as well. So just a couple of key takeaways as you fill this out for the coming school year. Make sure your goal action numbers, goal titles all match what is entered into the goals and actions section of the LCAP. That is one thing that is checked for compliance to make sure everything is matching up. Similarly, the total funds must match for each action based on the action tables and the goals and actions section of the LCAP. Make sure you've identified the scope, unduplicated student groups, and location for any contributing actions. Remember that for an action to be contributing, it must either be funded by LCFF funds, or it may have a zero amount from any funding source with a planned percentage of improved services populated with a percentage. Now, the first required table to include is the 23-24 total planned expenditures table. And the nice thing to know is there is no data entry required on this table. Everything on this table will be pulled over from the data entry table. The contributing actions table also has no data entry, as all items were entered on the data entry table. However, you must filter this table to make sure only contributing actions are included. So in the one column there, contributing actions to increase improved services, make sure you've set the filter to yes. Now there's an important piece on this table that is checked during the compliance review of your LCAP. There are two percentage boxes that are calculated on this table. The first one I've identified here with the letter E, it's column E on the workbook, and that's the total percentage to increase or improve services for the coming school year. Now, this percentage in this box is calculated based on your data entry, on your budgeted base and supplemental concentration amounts, and it also adds in the required LCFF carryover percentage to arrive at the total requirement to increase improved services for the coming school year. So this is your target amount you must meet and must show in your LCAP that you have the required amount of contributing expenditures or percentage to meet this requirement. So the other column to look at is column H. This is what will be calculated based on all of the data entry you have made, all of your LCFF expenditures, and any percentage you have added. Now, in order for your LCAP to be approvable, the percentage amount in column H must be larger, equal to or larger, than the percentage amount in column E. If column H is less than column E, that means your LCAP does not meet the requirements for increase improving services by the statutory amount. You would need to either add actions or add additional LCFF funds to your current actions to meet that requirement. So just a couple of key takeaways on these couple of action tables for 23-24. There is no data entry for either table. All of the items are populated by the data entry table. Just make sure that the contributing action table is only showing contributing actions, so change that filter to yes if needed. And then finally, pay attention to those two percentage boxes. When all contributing actions are accounted for, the percentage in the planned percentage to increase improved services for the coming school year box, which is in column H, should be greater than or equal to than the percentage in the total percentage to increase or improve services for the coming school year box. That's in column E. If the planned percentage is less than the total percentage, then the LEA has not met the required proportionality percentage for the LCAP year. So again, a caution, as the LCAP is refined throughout the development process, the required and planned percentages to increase improved services will change. As you update your budget projections, the numbers will change and the required percentage will change. As you update ADA projections, updated unduplicated pupil counts, etc., those numbers will change. As you work on your estimated actuals for the 22-23 school year, your 22-23 carryover obligation may change. So again, keep an eye on that. And then finally, decisions to shift funding to other funding sources, such as one-time funds or state and federal categorical programs, will affect your proportionality percentage. So again, it's recommended that the contributing actions table is reviewed and updated often, as estimates are made early in the budget and LCAP development process to determine if the ISS obligation will be met. To satisfy this requirement, again, contributing LCAP actions may need to be enhanced with additional funds, or new contributing actions may need to be developed. This will often require additional educational partner consultation that's difficult to do with impending LCAP adoption timelines. So as a recap, the 5 tables that will be included in your upcoming 23-24 LCAP. You have the first 2 tables is for the coming school year, 23-24, and the last 3 tables, 3, 4, 5, will be for the current school year, 22-23. The data entry tables are not required to be included. If you're using the Excel worksheet, this is a quick snapshot of what would be required to be included based on the year, but remember it does take 2 versions of the Excel template to accomplish this. That concludes our walkthrough for the 23-24 LCAP adoption action tables. Thank you very much.